What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the Real Reflection channel. Today, we're roughly halfway through the year. We are roughly getting close to halfway through 2023. Time marches on, my God. And today I wanted to start breaking down, do a little checkup on where we are with the year. So I wanted to give you my top 5 favorite movies of 2023 so far. Before we get into that, I just wanted to take a second to talk about the year. I think it's actually been a really interesting year. Specifically with the top 5. Numbers 6 through 31. I'm at 31 new releases in 2023. 6 through 31 is a lot of that's good. That was good. That was good. I enjoyed that. That was fun. But there's a couple in this top 5 that are very much oh, that's what this medium is capable of. That's what film is capable of. There's a lot of some of the best in its genre film in this top 5. So I'm very excited to jump into that. Also, before we get started, I did want to give a couple of honorable mentions. My first honorable mention, I think probably the biggest, because nobody saw it, and it's so much more fun than it's gotten credit for. I've seen it twice now. Dungeons and Dragons: Honor Among Thieves. This movie is shockingly good. We've spent a lot, the MCU is in a weird place right now, and we've spent a lot of time talking about how we wish the MCU was back in the glory days. Dungeons and Dragons: Honor Among Thieves feels like the best version of the MCU glory days. The second time I watched it, when I talked about it on the podcast, I compared it to Guardians of the Galaxy meets The Princess Bride. I think this script is much more clever, and the humor is much more smart and snappy than the Guardians movies. That's nothing against the Guardians movies. The Guardians movies are great, but I think in terms of pure comedy, I just prefer the type of comedy that's in Dungeons and Dragons. But in terms of building a world, the characters, their relationship, the emotion that it develops, the heart that it develops with those characters, I think D&D does a really, really great job at all of that. So it is my first honorable mention. Second honorable mention, Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret is a film that I had no real expectation of going in. I wasn't even sure I was gonna see it. And it's it's definitely I as much as I appreciated this movie, I can't imagine what it's like for moms and daughters and girls. I can't imagine, I've never had that experience. I've never had that struggle. So I can't imagine what this movie is like for those people. For me, I thought it was an incredibly heartfelt, incredibly sweet movie about just growing up and coming of age and really, really deciding who you are in the face of the inevitable adversity that everybody faces. And there was just enough things in it that play on my own specific baggage that if I have to do text to self-reflection, which is something I do with most movies. There's just enough there. There's just enough of that X factor to really, really push it over the line for me. I think Rachel McAdams is incredible in this movie. I think Abby Ryder-Fortson is great. I think Kathy Bates is great. I think Benny Safdie, who I totally thought was Darren Criss. I don't know if I called him Darren Criss, and I don't know if I said he was Darren Criss in my review, but it's not Darren Criss, it's Benny Safdie. Benny Safdie is awesome. Just Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret is a truly delight. It's a true delight of a film, and if you haven't seen it, you should go check it out. With that, let's jump into the list. Before we get started, feel free to jump into the comments below and let me know what your favorite movies of the year so far are. I hope to, at some point over the next week or two, maybe the next couple days, we'll see, do a top 5 TV shows of the year so far and a top 5 most anticipated films of the rest of the year. yeah, let's jump into the actual list. Um, Coming in at number 5 is a film, probably the only film on this list that's going to be slightly controversial, Skinamarink. If you're a horror fan, um, I even among horror fans, Skinamarink has been very, very polarizing. Um, Speaking of that text of self-reflection, there's a Skinamarink is a movie that feels specifically made for people who were my age, kids of the 90s and early 2000s, who grew up on a very specific type of horror. I didn't really watch horror movies for the first like 15 years of my life, but I watched a lot of internet horror, a lot of creepypasta, a lot of like analog horror. I watched a lot of that. This movie feels like it's playing on that. It feels like a feature length version of creepypastas and uh, internet horror that I grew up on, which makes sense because the filmmaker started on YouTube. Um, I yeah, I thought this movie was incredible. I thought it gave just enough clues as to what was going on that it allows you to like build your own theories, which is something that like I love it when movies do that. I love it when movies kind of give you just a taste of what's going on. Like they provide a satisfying experience, but there's so much more under the surface that you can think about and interpret on your own and come to on your own. Um, yeah, and then like the thing that's going to be controversial is the very experimental way it's shot and edited and colored. Cause like a lot of this movie is you're just looking at like corners. You're just looking at like the ground. There's like two faces in the entire three. There's like three faces in this entire movie. Um, and I found it to be brilliant. Like it like and I'm in a minority on that. Like this I don't believe like it has like a 3.2 on Letterboxd. Um, so like this is my list. This is my recommendation. But for me, Skinamarink landed. I loved it. I will never forget watching this for the first time because a thing happened in my house like halfway through that scared the crap out of me in relation to the movie. Like it's not a thing that happens in the movie, but the experience of watching it affected how I reacted to this situation. Um, just a really, really great uh, movie, at least for me. Um, yeah. Coming in at number 4, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. This is a perfect ending to this trilogy. It's a perfect wrap up for these characters. It has all of the emotion, all the heart. I think it's maybe the darkest movie in the entire MCU. Um, and to that point, it feels the least like an MCU movie. I've given 3 comic book movies 5 stars. And Guardians 3 is not one of them, but it started that way. When I first saw it, when I came out of it, I was like, this is a 5-star movie. I've dropped it a half star since then because I think there's some pacing issues in the first 20 minutes. Um, but this is a movie that does not feel like an MCU movie. This feels like a James Gunn movie. It's Guardians of the Galaxy is like a branch of the MCU. Where like the first one is very much of the MCU, and I think that's the reason I don't like it as much as everyone else. It's very much of the MCU, and then Guardians 2 kind of moves away from that a little bit, and I love Guardians 2 absolutely. And then Guardians 3 feels almost completely separate from the MCU, other than the fact that they kind of have to reference major events in these characters' lives that happened in other MCU movies. But I think the villain in this movie is great. I think the jokes all land really well. I think the stakes just really, really elevate the film. Guardians 3 is really, really great, and I really, really like it. Chris Pratt gives a great performance. All the performances are great. Go watch it. James Gunn is going to make the best Superman movie of all time. Um, James Gunn's going to make the best Superman movie of all time. Yeah, that's my take on Guardians 3. Coming in at number 3 is Air. Air is the story of how Nike got the Michael Jordan sponsorship. Um, but that so doesn't do the movie justice. Air is a story about immortality. Air is a story about fame and the ways in which the things we do last longer than we ever will. Air is a story about symbolism. That rabbit trail. The word meme was originated in the 1970s, and it was described as a symbol that connotates cultural significance, an image that has cultural significance. And I believe the first thing the word meme was used to describe was the Jordan symbol. Um, this movie is about that. This movie is about the legacy of Michael Jordan, the legacy of and the legacy of what he did as a man that will last longer than he ever will. That will last longer than anyone in this movie ever will. Um, and I loved that because I spend way too much time thinking about the idea of legacy and the idea of things that will last forever. I spend way too much time thinking about that. Yeah, so I thought Air was incredible. The performances are incredible. Matt Damon is great. Viola Davis is incredible as Michael Jordan's mother. Ben Affleck is great. Jason Bateman, weirdly like underrated actor for me. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe it's because I don't watch Ozark, but I feel like I haven't seen Jason Bateman in a really long time. So I just loved getting to see him pop up in this movie. Um, yeah, this is Marlon Wayans is also great. I believe it's Marlon Wayans. Marlon Wayans is great. Air is kind of utterly brilliant, I thought. I thought Air was just utterly fantastic. Highly recommend. It's great. The choice to not show Michael Jordan is maybe one of my favorite choices in cinema of like the decade. It's such a perfect choice and it so perfectly represents what this movie is trying to portray and what this movie is trying to say. Air is brilliant and you should absolutely go see it. Or absolutely, it's on Amazon Prime. Go watch Air. Um, yeah. With that, let's get into our number 2. For a long time, my number 2 film of the year was my number 1. I even after I saw the movie that eventually overtook it, I didn't think anything was gonna overtake this. But the more I thought about that other movie, the more I was like, so they're kind of interchangeable. They're kind of interchangeable. This is kind of a tie for first place because they're both functionally perfect. But my number 1 has like a couple things that I knock back on it, but the perfection is almost more perfect. Like I think number 1 is more significant as a film than my number 2, but they're both like in a tie for first place. My number 2 is John Wick Chapter 4. John Wick Chapter 4 is 3 hours and you don't feel it at all. It feels epic. It feels like this epic saga, but it does such a good job of building characters that you enjoy watching and putting them in these distinct situations and then shooting and editing and lighting those situations in some of the best action I've ever seen. And it's just such a perfect action movie. It's such a perfect action movie. Like, yeah, the actual plot is like, oh, I mean, okay. But I think the more I've thought about the plot, the more I've thought about this Greek tragedy of a man's search for peace. Um, the more I've kind of fallen in love with the plot of this movie, in the same way that I'm in love with the rest of the movie. If you can hear that, I'm sorry. The more I've fallen in love with the plot of this movie, the more I've fallen in love with the rest of the movie as a whole. Um, I think it's a perfect action movie. I think it's a perfect John Wick movie. Um, I think the ending is actually brilliant. I think it's a really, really fascinating choice about like for the character of John and it's a fascinating direction to take the world. Um, the idea of getting a fifth movie is kind of ridiculous. Like I don't know. There's a lot like I don't know how you do that. I don't know how you do a John Wick 5. I just don't know. Um, but yeah, John Wick 4 is incredible, and you should absolutely see it. Watch all of the John Wick movies. They're great. It's a fascinating story about consequences. It's a fascinating John Wick is a saga of choices and consequences, and I just love it. I just love it so much. I love these movies so damn much. Um, yeah, that's my take on John Wick 4. Now we got the big one. Coming in at number one, my favorite movie of the year so far. Once again, kind of in a tie kind of in a tie with John Wick, but I do like I do think it's more important than John Wick 4 is, and that is Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse is kind of insane. Like it's kind of insane that this movie exists. I've seen it twice now. It's kind of watching this movie is one of the most overwhelming experiences I've ever had in a theater. Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse is one of the most overwhelming experiences I've ever had in a theater. I found it to be just kind of overwhelming. Just kind of overwhelming. I don't know. I don't remember if I talked about this in on the podcast, but there's a couple there like there's been some issues with the volume in people's theaters, and I had that both times. So I can't imagine what the movie's going to be like when I see it in another theater that doesn't have the volume problems, or when I see it at home. I can't imagine what that experience is going to be like. This movie is so smart, like so smart. They are throwing things at you a mile a minute, whether it's jokes, lore, information, just the character moments, emotion. They're throwing things at you at a pace that I've never seen before. This is the longest animated movie in Hollywood history. It's not the longest animated movie of all time, but it's the longest Western animated movie. And you don't feel it. That's the insane thing. I went to the first time I watched it, I went to the bathroom thinking I was maybe an hour and 10 minutes in, thinking there was an hour left. And then I came back and it ended 30 minutes later. Like, genuinely, this movie moves at such a pace that uh, you genuinely don't feel the runtime. You genuinely don't feel that length. And that's incredible. The other thing that I did not talk about in my review that I totally meant to, um, the voice cat. This might be like calling this the greatest animated movie of all time. I don't know if we're there yet. Calling this the greatest comic book movie of all time. I don't know if we're there yet. Calling this one of the greatest movies of all time. I don't know if we're there yet. The thing that I will say, this movie probably has the best voice acting I've ever heard. Shameik Moore is incredible. And he's both funny and emotional and heartfelt. Haley Steinfeld is incredible. Oscar Isaac as Miguel O'Hara 2099 is incredible. This movie just does such a good job of like embracing the medium of animation and telling this story in a way that you couldn't do in any other medium. It's one of the best. It's probably the best animated movie of all time. Um, just like a borderline perfect movie. I think the last like 20 or 30 minutes drags a tiny bit, just a little bit. But other than that, this movie's like basically perfect. I think, and it sets up a movie that I think probably will be perfect. It sets up a movie that I think will be like a top 3, top 4 favorite movie of all time for me. Genuinely, that's how good I think this movie is. And that's how good I think this trilogy is. Yeah, everything about this worked for me, except for that little bit in the last act. Everything about this worked for me. If you haven't seen Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, begging you, please go see it. The emotion is great. The characters are great. The action is incredible. It's funny. Um, if you haven't seen Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, please go see it. Do yourself that favor. This movie needs to make $1 billion, please. But yeah, that's my take on Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse. Go see it. Yeah, and that is the top 5 best movies of the year so far. Yeah. Wow. It's been a really, really fun year. Like, it's been a really, really fun year. I feel like that top 5 is a little bit misleading when you compare it to the rest of the year, the other 26 movies I've seen. But if that's our crop of great movies, then I'm very proud to be living in this movie year. I'm very proud to be living in 2023 and watching movies in 2023. And yeah. So, with that down, go ahead and jump down in the comments below and let me know what your favorite movies of the year so far are. And yeah, don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe. And we will see y'all in whatever the next video is. Catchphrase.